This video was made possible by viewers like you over on Patreon. Check out the link in the description to hear how you can help make shows like this be even more amazing. Hey everyone, Gaijin Goombah here. So, alright, I know I might be kinda late to the game when it comes to this particular topic, but honestly, I just wanted to wait a month before I said anything publicly about this show. Not only because I wanted to give everyone who wanted to watch Samurai Rabbit the Usagi Chronicles the chance to see it before spoilers, but also because I'm still trying to process my thoughts on the show. See, for those of you who don't know, this Netflix series is based around one of the most well-known comic book series in US history. How well known? Well, for one, it got its start back in 1984 and is still being published to this day. And for two, the universe of Usagi Yojimbo has often been integrated into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise. Thus, these two universes are often seen as one by most people these days. So yeah, this comic series about a Ronin rabbit has a lot of legacy and fans of all ages, myself included. So, like so many people who grew up with Usagi, hearing about a release of a new, modern take on this beloved comic classic absolutely got my attention. After all, I was a fan of Usagi Yojimbo long before I started culturally analyzing popular media for a living. So I see making this video as not only an excuse to nosedive back into a childhood favorite comic, but also to highlight the potential Japanese culture within the show, similar to how Stan Sakai interwove it into his original comics. And boy, oh boy, I'm not the only one interested. My patrons were more than curious for me to check this Netflix original out. So let's take a deep dive into Samurai Rabbit and try to piece together what works, what doesn't, and what potentially made for some incredibly solid tangential opportunities for kids wanting to learn more about Japan.
What works? That's a bit of a laugh. Did you and I see the same show? Yeah, saying that this show is for kids is a charitable way of describing just how basic this show really is. Cause, sorry to say adult fans, there's very little here for you. The writing, as far as I can tell, is equal parts confusing, yet overly explained. For example, two of the best jokes in the season happened during episode 5. But with the writing the way that it is, it just kept over-explaining the joke to the point it just completely lost all steam. Assumedly because they want to make sure that none of the really young kids miss the joke. And then there are some scenes that just go nowhere. It's just abstract goofiness because kids show, I guess. And trust me, I'm not against abstract goofiness, but when it doesn't serve a point, it just feels like nothing. And oh lordy, that doesn't even take into account the technical problems this show has. Frame rate drops that briefly turn the show into a 3D rendered claymation, truly weird walk cycles that stick out like an improperly rendered thumb, and the fighting just looks stiff and boring. And combat, arguably, is one of the most important aspects of an action-oriented show for kids. Going back to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comparison, the very first cartoon of that franchise was full of absolutely bizarre technical issues and mistakes, but the action was still really good, and guess what? That's what kids wanted to see. And that was as far back as 1987. With the technology that we have now, I just don't understand why these problems persist.
Alright, time out. Look, I understand that Samurai Rabbit isn't the best looking show out there, but two things, okay? First of all, it's real obvious that the show was done on a tight budget of time and or money. Watching through the show, I could tell what the creators were going for, but just needed a bit more polish in order to really make it shine. I cannot fault the creators for working with that kind of limitation. Second, we're here to talk about the folklore that built up the world of Samurai Rabbit, just like it did for OG Usagi Yojimbo. I'd rather leave the validation of this quality to the critics. We're here for culture, my guy, not critique.
Yeah, even then, I don't know about that one, Chief. Despite being a show called Samurai Rabbit and the main character Yuichi Usagi trying to be a samurai rabbit like his forefather, there's no samurai in this show. Like, none. Oh, there's talk of samurai all over the place, but the protagonists, antagonists, support characters, yeah, there isn't a single samurai amongst them. Kinda hard to do a witch samurai with that criteria.
True, but remember the time this series supposedly takes place in. The show revolves around the location of Neo-Edo, a more modern take on Japan's own Edo and Edo period. A time known as Japan's artistic renaissance of stage performance, music, writing, and painting. But you know who wasn't doing so hot during this time? Samurai. The Edo period saw the gradual decline of the samurai as a class into irrelevance due to the nation's newfound status of unified peace. And with it came a pining for the, quote, good old days of samurai bravado in the way of life. Seeing Yuichi Usagi so fervent about becoming a samurai despite there being no samurai is actually pretty indicative of the time period, historically speaking. And before anyone gets up in my face about how this is just circular cultural evolution and that this world's Edo period is long, long gone, this series actually references this world's Sengoku Jidai Warring States period. And guess what? It wasn't that long ago.
Were you in the wars? Honey, I was the wars.
Alright, fine, but then please do explain this character. Seriously, guess what occupation this character is supposed to have? Not sure? Well, he's supposed to be the freaking Shogun. And I have several questions. One, what the heck is this hat supposed to be? Men of the court at this time would typically wear eboshi hats of varying size, not this Pope hat looking number. No, I'm wrong. He actually looks like freaking Galactus. Also, what is he doing out in the street with the Keisatsu police force? He's the Shogun. The Shogun does not get their hands dirty with everyday grunt work like this. Finally, Lord Golgane over here keeps worrying about elections.
After this, I'll be reelected for sure.
That's not how shogunate rule works! The Tokugawa Shogunate, which is the governing body of the time the show is parodying, was a bloodline inherited system for nearly 200 years. There were no elections!
This is a show made for kids in the West, buddy. I severely doubt children between the ages of 6 and 12 would have a super strong grasp with the overcomplicated intricacies of the shogun's leadership role in actual Japan. This is merely just shorthand for an audience that... Oh, don't you freaking dare. Oh, God. Alright, I've been playing Taiko on and off for the last 10 years. I've played it living in Japan, and I play it living in the States right now. I have equal parts passion and experience with this family of percussion instruments, and this really, I guess, just shows how, quote, for kids this series can feel. And you know what? It drives me nuts too, because while Netflix subtitles say this guy is, quote, speaking in Japanese, he's actually doing what's called kuchishoga, a system of onomatopoeia used by taiko drummers to sing taiko songs verbally, using the words don to represent the center of a drum head hit, and ka being a hit on the rim. Why they would include this, correctly I might add, completely out of context, then utterly trivialize the instrument into a gag this childish, It's like the writers know exactly what they're talking about culturally, but because of this lower age demographic, everything just has to be a gag. Or even worse, the writers just kind of saw and heard what kuchishoga is and then just put it in the show without any context.
So then, what does that mean for the show culturally? Cause it really feels like it was put together with slapdash tropes with little understanding of the actual culture the show borrows from.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot wrong with Samurai Rabbit. Not just technically, but culturally in some cases. But you know what? Despite the last 6 some odd minutes of us tearing the show apart, I believe wholeheartedly that when it comes to at least some aspects of this show, the creators knew exactly what they were working with and incorporated as such. Like, take the soundtrack for instance, one of the show's greatest strengths in my opinion. There is such a massive focus on both shakuhachi and shamisen in it. And while that might not seem like anything important, after all, we associate a lot of Japanese music with those instruments, the Edo period is where these two instruments hit their own renaissance. With the development of the Fuke shakuhachi, aka the modern shakuhachi, and the hard-hitting, fast-paced Tsugaru style of shamisen, these two instruments saw an insane increase in popularity with Edo period performing arts, perfectly complementing this neo-Edo in both sound and history. Then we have all these character names, which, much like Kung Fu Panda, are all simply the species of each character, just pushed through the linguistic filter of the country they represent. Usagi, Japanese for hare. Kitsune, Japanese for fox. Mogura, Japanese for mole. Keisatsu, Japanese for police. Hua, Japanese for fluffiness. Kagehito, literally meaning shadow person, which sums up the main antagonist very well. Kogane, it means gold, which illustrates the priority that this character has, those being of selfishness and greed. While at first I thought it was kind of one-dimensional and dumb that all of these characters' names are just Japanese words of their species, I realized that this is actually a superb opportunity for kids to tangentially learn Japanese words. But you wanna know the one thing that Samurai Rabbit nails absolutely 100% correctly? Yokai. Yeah, one of the most esoteric aspects of Japanese culture that only just recently really started to hit any level of mainstream recognition in US markets. Despite the technical issues and the overly childish writing, it's the design, development, and implementation of yokai that Samurai Rabbit Yojimbo Chronicles nails down to an absolute T. Like, take Karasu Tengu for example, one of the first ongoing yokai characters introduced in this series. An anthropomorphic bird with massive wings on her back, a small flat cap on her forehead, a tied rope with 6 circular designs going down the front, and carrying a ringed staff that transforms into a plethora of weapons. A quite literal one-to-one visual comparison to the yokai she takes her namesake from. The flat cap representing a Yamabushi Tolkien, as well as the 6 circular designs on her robe resembling the 6 pom-pom-like Yui Geisa, also worn by Yamabushi monks. Finally, the ring staff in her hand is a one-to-one example of a shakujo staff, with the rings acting not only as a noisemaker to alert people of the monk's presence, but also as symbolism for the 6 realms of existence. All of these things Tengu would wear. But what about Karasu Tengu's behavior in the show? We see that she's openly aggressive to Lord Kogane for his part in destroying a local force in order to build Neo-Edo. She's also nearly immediately identified as a supernatural master of martial arts, and unlike many of the other yokai in the show, she takes on a protagonist role, acting as Yuichi's teacher in the ways of the sword. Well, fun fact, gang, Tengu were all of these things historically. I've actually been to one of the believed mountain homes of Tengu on Mount Takao, and it was here that I learned that these Tengu who supposedly lived in these isolated, hidden mountain forests all over the country were highly territorial, defending their forest with such ferocity that it was believed that merely trespassing in their mountain forest home meant death. Tengu are also the most capable yokai with the sword, believed to know mythic level techniques of the weapon. And just like Karasu Tengu taught Yoichi Usagi the ways of the warrior in an isolated part of the mountains, so too did Soul Jobo and his clan of Karasu Tengu teach the young Minamoto no Yoshitsune how to become the greatest swordsman in all of Japan. Do you see what I mean? It's not just the surface level that this show references, but incredible minute details. In fact, these minute details of yokai folklore are so minute that in this show, if you didn't have any prior understanding of yokai, you'd probably miss the references. Like, take Old Dokuro for example. He's based verbatim on the Gasha Dokuro, an invincible kaiju-sized skeleton made from the bones of those who died on the battlefield with grudges in their hearts. And I mean it when I say that Gasha Dokuro is invincible. The only warning you get of one's approach is a ringing in your ears, and after that, it's either run or get your head bitten off. Now, I will say that Old Dokuro in the show is a bit on the small side and absolutely one of the goofiest yokai that Yuichi and the team face, but even then, this is exactly what Gasha Dokuro or Old Dokuro are. They even say so themselves.
I am Old Dokuro, the mightiest of the yokai, born of the bones of those who died in war.
And if those words aren't enough, take a look at his ribcage. There's all manner of skulls in there, so this whole story just checks out. And then a short time later, this over-exaggerated bone boy drops this other piece of lore mid-fight.
Dokuro has no weaknesses.
Now, without any previous understanding of yokai, one might think that this is just standard villainous bluster for a kid's show. But the weird thing is that he's absolutely correct. Gasha Dokuro do not have any weaknesses and typically cannot be stopped. These are concepts that are taken directly from yokai folklore. But, you wanna know the best example of this show completely understanding the sociological ideology of yokai? Well, it comes in episode 3 when we're introduced to a near dozen different Tsukumogami yokai, aged items that developed sentience and became monsters. And the show calls them by name.
These are Tsukumogami. They inhabit objects that haven't been taken care of.
We got Shouchinobake, Kasoobake, Bakezori, Mokumokuren, Biwa Boku, Koto Furunishi, and several more that look like they came right out of the popular Edo Emaki they historically originated from. There's even a multi-episode mini-arc involving an Osakobori, a Tsukumogami of an Eboshi quartzman's cap that has the power to control the mind of its wearer. And while it was introduced in episode 3, it finally makes its move to mind control Lord Kogane in the very next episode. And the best part out of all of this episode not only features some incredibly obscure yokai, giving them the spotlight in mainstream media, this episode also explains their sociological reason for being.
And that Shogun! He wears his hats just one time, then he throws them away!
I will find good homes for Lord Kogane's old hats. Don't do that. You have to start treating your hats better.
The reason why Tsukumogami became what they did was because they were not properly taken care of. Most of the time left to thrown away or rot. This creates a burning anger, seething, and sadness within the item, and by its 100th year of existing, it gains full sentience and oftentimes murderous intent. Finally, at the end of this episode, in just one brief exchange, this series perfectly explains yokai conceptually.
It's true. Some of us are monsters. But some of you are monsters. Not all yokai are bad.
While most yokai are, in fact, bad for humanity, there are some yokai that are in fact good. The Kappa of Solgenshi Temple in Taito City, for example, saved the local area from a raging flood long ago, rather than being the cause of it, and thus praised for their good deeds. Not far from there, the Tanuki of Chingodo and Asakusa were yokai that swore to defend the grounds from fire. Which they have. There hasn't been a single fire in Denbo-in since 1868, despite war and natural disasters ravaging the country since. And let's not forget the aforementioned Tengu that trained one of the greatest heroes in Japanese history. So, in my final analysis, sure, the show may have a lot of technical issues and even some cultural inaccuracies for the sake of time and age of the audience, but there is an unmistakable passion within the show for Japan's culture, as well as a very strong fundamental idea of what yokai are. That was truly the most surprising thing of all. But thanks for watching, everyone. A big thank you to my patrons who make these videos possible. Apologies this one got out so late, but as you saw, there was a lot to take on with this topic, and I'm really glad you all chose it. And if you want to help take part in putting videos together, one-on-one conversations, and other rewards, be sure to check out our Patreon. Link in the description. Otherwise, sub up, get notified, and come back in a week or two, because we got some legendary booba to talk about, as well as why you shouldn't visit Japan. At least not yet. But until next time, everyone, this is Gaijin Goombah, signing out.